Just cause everybody doing what they all do. If one thing I know, I fall but I grow. I'm walking down this road of mine, this road that I came. So am I wrong for thinking that we could be something for real? Now am I wrong for trying to reach the things that I can't see? That's just how I feel. That's just how I feel. That's just how I feel. Trying to reach the things that I can't see. From having a vision, my prediction, I'm gonna be on top of the world. Don't look back, just do what you decide. Don't control your life, that's just how I feel. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen, your host of Blockchain Banter, and I'm here with Tim Quinn of Congruent Labs and Signata, along with Rick Barber of Bancorp. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Rick, both so much for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Tim, maybe you wouldn't mind starting us off and just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, I've worked in enterprise, large federal government for, in the identity space for, it's 10 years now, easily, well, a bit over 10 years. So, I've been building identity systems for entire countries, populations, working around passport management, that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's a lot there, but that's kind of like my main background. So, I'm a IT security professional, but specifically skilled around the identity management parts of the world.
That's huge. Huge. Rick, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself. Thank you, Tim.
Nothing too special. I've just been an entrepreneur and small business owner and advisor for, going on 20 years now, and got into crypto in about 2015 on a small, curious scale, and really got in deep when DeFi came out late 2019, early 2020, and was blessed enough to get heavily invested into the community with Bancorp, and ultimately get contracted to handle events globally for them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you guys again for being here. So we're talking about identity theft in Web3. Now, obviously, identity theft is something like in the traditional world that we think about our social security numbers being stolen and things of that sort. It is a huge problem. And this might seem like a silly question. And for, without fear of sounding ridiculous, how exactly does identity theft in the traditional sense that we know it differ from identity theft in Web3? Like, I kind of want to define that a little bit before we kind of dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like nothing's really changed much from Web 2. Like, if you look at what a Web 2 identity is, it's something like, your Google account that you're using for Gmail and all of those kind of services. What people are trying to steal is something like your username, your email address, and then your password. They'll try to get you to go to a website that's dodgy, a phishing website or whatever, and steal credentials and then act as you. In Web3, that fundamentally hasn't changed. It's just what people are trying to get instead is keys. seeds for wallets, because we're basically replacing your username, like an email address, with something like your public wallet address, and then the password that you had before, well, that turns into the private key or the seed for your wallet. So it's fundamentally the same thing, and we see, it's rampant everywhere in Web3 right now, just in terms of all of the phishing attacks that try to happen on people that use wallets like Trust Wallet or MetaMask. There's people constantly trying to get you to go to websites that they can extract the seed or the private key out of whatever your wallet is or your identity is.
It's such a shame. You're right. You really do hear about it all too often. Rick, you were going to say something. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. I was going to add that, the interesting dynamic in Web3 and, in crypto in general, right, is this idea that you can be anonymous in the transactions that you do. Even here on, Twitter, most people have kind of handles that aren't their names, and they like to be able to have that anonymity as they maneuver through the world. And when you look at like decentralized exchanges and these non-custodial wallets that are out there, they're all based on these cryptographic keys like Tim's talking about, and there's not an identity per se attached to them, but it makes it one level deeper now to try to uncover the access if you're going after, let's say, value, something of value like crypto assets or something like that, versus just demographic information that can be exploited for advertising or marketing purposes.
It's such a huge point. I was actually going to talk about that, how anonymity is so important in the space. We were kind of talking about it the other day. It's important for users and for developers and founders of projects as well. But then it's kind of hard to gain that sort of confidence with users when you are behind a project and you are anonymous, But I think it's also kind of, people are under the impression that as long as you're not doxxed, you're somewhat safe. But then all of these phishing scams and things really come into play. And the advice that we always hear is don't click on anything unless it's an official website, unless you've verified it, you've gone to, or click on a link from an official website only. What are others, like some other measures that users here in the space can take in order to protect themselves and avoid having that happen?
Yeah, I mean, like a big part of it is just due diligence on the part of users, just to make sure that they actually are paying attention. But, what we really need to see in this ecosystem is, Web3 is very much the Wild West right now. Everyone's kind of trying to discover the best way to build things. And what we want to do is bring in the tools that work in Web2 to help protect your identity over into Web3. And that's things like, hardware key storage to make sure that, like, even if someone does send you to something like a phishing website, they're not going to get anything because the keys are stored somewhere more securely rather than just sitting inside a web browser. Other things like, splitting apart, we have the power with crypto where we can use a seed to split an identity up into multiple pieces, so that something that you expose to other services, you don't actually have to expose keys, or you don't have to expose the exact same thing that you might be using for trading, using your wallet as an actual wallet. So it's basically bringing in those kinds of, two-factor authentication, that kind of stuff. We really need those brought into the ecosystem so people can have that and then not accidentally just completely own themselves if they happen to misclick. It's like, you want to have multiple guards in place, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
And I think you have a little bit of obstacle because, unlike when the internet first came out, the internet was so foreign that there was such a resistance to so many things that were taking place as far as this connectivity and providing information freely. Until HTTPS came out, and there really was adoption in e-commerce, and you had these layers of not just who you are and stealing your identity for the sake of getting a social security number or something like that, you had access to credit card information. People could make purchases on your behalf, and so you had credit card fraud, and now that space, Web 2, is developed, really well to a point that people feel really comfortable, and there's a lot of protections in place that give them the sense of confidence. And moving over to Web3, I think a lot of people carry over that same sense of false security that's there, not recognizing that there's new threats and the threats are different. And in this case, sometimes they're even greater, because when you look at, let's say, connecting your MetaMask wallet up to a site that wants to, participate with your wallet in some way, fashion, or form, if you don't have, real blockchain credentials and able to really understand what exactly permissions you're giving when you connect that wallet, it's almost like freely giving away your credit card information, including the PIN, including the 3-digit code on the back. And I think the concern for me when I think about this whole space is that sense of confidence that's there in Web 2 is somewhat being carried over into Web 3 ignorantly, and then people are running into some problems and they're becoming victims. And there's plenty of people that are waiting on the sidelines, waiting to prey on that sense of false security, thinking that Web3 is as far along with third-party applications, third-party protection, protection from vendors, things like that, that put them more at risk.
Yeah, I remember back, back when PayPal and eBay was sort of very new, before even PayPal, there was just eBay, and people, everyone was really hesitant to like give up their credit card information to a website to buy stuff. It was very strange. And then along comes PayPal, and it fixed a lot of those problems. And then it introduces some more of its own because of centralization. But yeah, definitely there's users have that kind of like expectation that things are going to function the same. But the difference now is, it's that whole be your own bank kind of thing. If you're in control of the custody of your wallet, then it's up to you to apply the security that you need. But there's just not the tools there right now to enable that for people. So that's really kind of what we're focused on building up, is those tools to give people that power. Add those functions in that are essential for ongoing management of identity in Web3.
So, Tim, when you first started Signata, was it because you have this knowledge and this expertise in the area, and you just saw this need for it in Web3? Or was it like you kind of started learning about blockchain technology and you brought what you knew over, hoping to, looking to create these solutions for it? There's a necessity for it, obviously. Was that kind of where you were at with that?
Yeah. We saw this would have been early 2020-ish, around that time. We saw, there's a whole bunch of services being built up, and they're all just sort of hooking into people's wallets and using those to identify people, things like that. And we've thought this is good, and this Web3 standard, like around identity, is good, but it's missing all of the life cycle stuff that is essential for an identity. Like, you don't just create an identity and just use that forever. You need to have, everyone has more than one identity. We always, if we're at work, we have a work identity. Work gives us an identity that we use to work amongst each other. Then we have a personal identity. We might have more than one personal identity, depending on what we need to use the internet for. And so that's kind of what we saw. We saw that gap of like, we need life cycle management to be incorporated into the Web3 world. And so we'll build the tools for that, as well as the tools for everything else around it. Like, that's why, I think in the past I've called it like a full stack kind of project. It's meant to be like, the identity is just like one small part. You still need life cycle, like locking identities, transferring identities, managing the rights that you have to access things. It's all of that, all of those little annoying things that have to do around it, that we saw as essential to be added.
What do you mean transferring identities? I mean, does that, because I know that one of the major things was NFTs, and cryptography and using them as an identity. Do you mean something to that extent? Maybe you could just elaborate on that a little bit for me.
Yeah, so it comes down to like in the old cryptography world, generally things like keys that you use for accessing or for securing a service, like HTTPS keys, that kind of thing, they always have time limits on them. It's generally a bad idea to use them for forever, because at some point, the more you use it, the greater the risk it can become, the greater the risk it can be exposed or compromised. And that's sort of been forgotten in the crypto world, like in the Web3 world. People are using keys for probably longer than they should be. And so we need systems in place to basically move identity information across to new keys. So that would be things like NFT rights and things like that. So, if you've been, our protocol is built around issuing NFT-based rights to access systems, like if you want, premium access to a service, whatever, or you've done KYC with a provider, that all of that information, that's generally not keys that you would use very often, but you're using them to prove who you are. Over time, though, those need to be moved to new identities. So, rolling them over into fresh new identities every year, maybe every 2 years, that kind of thing, just as an extra layer of protection to make sure there is no risk of compromise. But then also, like, if you have actually been compromised in some way, we've got some tools there to quickly like lock your identity so it can't be used anymore, and then moving all of those assets to a new identity to make sure you've still got them, but the old key that they were associated with gets destroyed. If that makes sense.
It does. Rick, I noticed he was unmuted, so I wanted to give him a chance. I think he wanted to say something. Go ahead, Rick. You first.
Yeah, I was going to say that where the market is going, and where I think people need to have proper expectations is in, I'm not an expert on Signata by any means, but I think I understand that the premise of being able to provide validation that you are who you are, or are of a certain criteria that meets needs of a government, of a high level agency or something like that, without having to actually reveal specific information, kind of like when you're KYC'd by a third party, the public project community may not understand who you are, but there's a validation somewhere in the background that if you do something nefarious, there is a means to then hold you accountable to that. And so I think for those kind of applications that's wonderful, but people need to not get a sense false that at some point they can become ghosts, right? And nobody's gonna be able to track them and know who they are, where they're at. You're still going to be a citizen somewhere. You're still going to be able to travel, and then even when you take that to another layer of the anonymity on your activity via Web3 or whatever, there's only so far that'll go, because the minute you buy a product and that product's got to be shipped somewhere, then you get into the problem of you've got to reveal logistics information, and there's always going to be a balance, I think, between what is almost a necessity in the way that our world works logistically, technologically now, and then what you can expect to have be the case, because everybody would like to just be ghosts in the world and move around and not be known, and that's just, I don't think, is a realistic expectation that people can have.
Yeah, that's, and it's definitely going to change, I think, like this year and probably next year as well, with regulations changing around how governments enforce KYC and all of that kind of thing. It's always different depending on which country you look at, but the general trend is sort of moving that direction. But I think what people will still want is one, and that's why we want to have multiple identities for people, like enable multiple identities for people, so they can have something that's used, more privately, because people want to still preserve that, but then they'll have, a more public identity that they use for the more common things, like accessing a central exchange or accessing government services or anything like that.
Yeah, and I almost see it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Tim, from your perspective. I almost see it like, I mean, my background is in infrastructure technology many moons ago. And so when you look at like the way there's layers of security from, physical access to a box all the way out to, are you just trying to penetrate a firewall kind of scenario? You got these layers of penetration and these layers of access. And I see identities and digital footprints becoming somewhat like that, where you have like a level one, which is the least intrusive type of identity card you can pull out that can be used for very basic, simple things, to the most in depth. For instance, when you want to, access a secure government facility or something, you have to whip out your top secret verification of who you are, which has a much closer signature of who you are. And I can see people monitoring and managing to some degree these different layers of identity into how they proceed through life. And I'm curious to see as we move forward how that kind of pans out, if that becomes something that's more of a burden, if it's something that people really embrace. And is it a large population that does it, or again, do governments even start to work against it because people are able to start using it for nefarious purposes? Because no matter how good any technology is, you're going to have somebody who can deploy it for good and somebody who can deploy it for bad. And the challenge is most regulations tend to side on we want to avoid all bad, even if that restricts most of the good. And that's where they should get pushed back, and hopefully we can find the greater good and find ways protecting against the bad.
Yeah, I mean, like I can sort of see this with some of the partners we work with around like DeFi protocols, things like that, where it's the projects don't care about the individual holders in their ecosystem. They care about the people who are in control of it. And so it's like if anyone's so government sort of targets regulation against the high value assets because they want to put their effort towards the most impact. So it's things like the people that govern a project or the people that are in control of treasuries, that kind of thing. It's like that's where you want to have that really strong identity enforcement for that assurance. And then there's a whole bunch of people that you just don't care about because they're just not high value identities for in respect of like the management of a project. You don't care about all of the holders, but you care about the core team or the people in control of large amounts of funds and that kind of thing. So I think that the tools need to be there to support both of those instances.
I want to bring it back to something that you said earlier, Tim, and it was such a great point. And you were saying that you don't think that it was really brought over to Web3, and that was updating passwords and things of that sort. And I think that that's a really important thing because that's such a simple security measure that people can take and really should still practice. I mean, do they even practice it that often in Web 2? I mean, are we updating our Gmail account passwords and things of that sort, like our phones and whatnot, as often as we should? Never mind in Web3. Like, that's such a simple sort of tip for people to hold on to and actually like really make a point to implement when looking to keep themselves safe. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's tricky because like in Web 2, if the password is the only thing that gets you into a service, then yeah, absolutely, you should be changing it often. But if you've added in other controls, things like two-factor authentication or whatever, that need sort of goes away because, you should still have a strong password for it, but then you're adding in people need to have, a physical device or something like that to then breach that identity or that account. So, that it's with Web3, it's like you could go and create a new wallet and then move everything across, and it's now you've rolled everything over. But it's really hard to get a normal user to do that and to understand the impact of why they need to do that. So the tools have to be there to sort of just do it for them without thinking, and then they sort of get that assurance that they'll get from those Web 2 kind of security layers that have been added in.
Okay, so with that being said, tell us a little bit about what Signata does exactly. because I didn't ask you. I kind of wanted to touch on like the whole security and identity theft topic first and learn a little bit more about it. But now that we have and we understand like the importance of protecting our identities and our passwords and rolling those over into new wallets and things, tell us a little bit about what exactly Signata is and what it offers to users.
Yeah, sure. So there's sort of two major components. There's the on-chain stuff, and then there's the off-chain stuff. So when it comes to on-chain, we've got things like identity management on the chain, so registering identities and defining them as like an identity plus a delegate key plus a security key. So there's some tools in there for people to roll over identities and use them more safely. When it comes to off-chain, then we've got this Web2 sort of extension that we've made for authentication, where it'll behave like a Web2 authentication, like when you log into, you use your Google account to log into something for single sign-on. It's a very similar experience, but that information is sort of held off chain. So there's identity brokers in between that exchange they'll look at your identity and then give a service like a website you're trying to log into or whatever. They'll say, okay, this guy's just logged in and this is his identifier, but that service never actually saw the identifier. So, for on-chain, there's all of these tools there for that lifecycle management. Plus, there's also the NFT Signata rights that we've defined. So we've extended the ERC 721 NFT standard to add a little bit extra components in, so we can basically have anyone can mint rights on chain and then assign them to identities. And then, those can be asserted wherever you need. So when it's on chain, it's things like if you're calling a smart contract to do something, say withdraw some funds or claim rewards or anything really, like it's literally any kind of call you want to make, injecting an identity check in there can be a useful tool to make sure, services can make sure that, hey, anyone who's interacting with my smart contract can check to see if this address was actually registered as an identity, if it's actually active, if it's been locked or anything like that. We don't want to use it. And then also look and see what kind of rights it holds and if you trust those rights. And then off-chain, there's so much more that can happen because, you can use cryptographic proofs and not need to inspect on-chain data, but, still have security controls in there. So, yeah, there's so many facets to it. I'm bound to forget one of them, but fundamentally it's managing your on-chain identity records and then presenting them to off-chain services to make sure that, you can actually log in securely and not leak any information.
So, Tim, I was looking at your website a lot today, and I really love what you have going on. I noticed that you're a Chainlink partner, which is exciting for me, being a big fan of Chainlink. I'm curious, are you working with or going to be able to capitalize on, or maybe competition? I apologize if I asked that, as far as Deco and some of the services that Deco offers or is looking to offer with your Chainlink.
Yeah, when it comes to our Chainlink integration, that's really heavily focused around risk. So it's things like, if you try to use something like your Google account, from another country, generally Google will detect that and go, hey, what's going on here? You need to step up authentication to actually prove that it's you, because something weird has happened. We're translating those kind of systems, those risk identification systems, into on-chain Oracle systems. So, when it comes to integrating with Chainlink, it's like if you've been using an identity actively through our identity provider, risk information is going to get reported to Chainlink. So then anyone who then wants to build a smart contract and have like some sort of risk check embedded in that can do that really easily. Ultimately, it's like it's basically there is like an extra layer of protection for, if you've agreed to exchange some funds between two people, like, some two people might do an atomic swap between each other. You might want to enforce, hey, is this an actual identity? Hey, did this person get KYC? Because I need to follow KYC AML things. But then also on top, we can do a call to Chainlink and say, what's the risk level of this identity? Has it done something weird lately? And if it has, then, the transaction can be stopped, because, the last thing you want to happen is a transaction to go through and you find out, oh no, that identity was that address was compromised and those funds are now stolen because it's blockchain and you can't reverse the transaction. So it's kind of just we're building extra security sort of checks and balances in to be made available to everyone.
It's almost like it raises red flags, as far as like where your wallet, like where you are interacting. Is that what you're saying, Tim? Like it kind of almost sends out an alert, basically, is kind of what you're doing with Chainlink and Signata.
Yeah, because like risk information is very dynamic. It's never fixed. You can't just write it to the chain and say this is the risk level, and then people read that, because then it has to keep changing over time. So that's why we've got this risk adapter being built to effectively just provide live data, so then people can call a function and then they'll get the real-time information to say, like, this is the risk level of that identity, and then can make a decision on the fly. And then if that risk level drops because that person fixed whatever they needed to do or whatever, then that call can be made again and the risk level will be satisfied and the transaction will go through.
Yeah, I think the best part about that is you're already ahead of the game, I think, in what any market needs to start building complete credibility, and that's usually with surrounding yourself with additional, I would say, superfluous products or services that reinforce what you do and give another layer of accountability. Whenever I give just general courses or teach folks around me about crypto in general, and they say, hey Rick, I hear about all these hacks, I hear about all these people getting their wallet stolen and everything else, and what's the crypto community going to do about that? And I usually tell them that it really is no different than, again, when you look at Web 2, and what happened is you can say that maybe regulation is where you want the answer, but really the market will provide and fill a need that the market demands. If you have, for instance, like you're saying, the problem with an identity service starting to get hacked or circumvented, and you can layer in another project that offers a specific thing that fills a gap or a void that you need, then that solves that market problem. And the more there's the problem, there's more of a need and a more of opportunity for another project and fill that. And so again, when I've looked at your page today, it was really cool because you've partnered with a lot of good groups. And you got a lot of authorities, I would say, that really reinforce that what you're doing is legitimate and that it's trustworthy. And even if people don't understand the tech behind it, because again, we're so early that a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is probably going to fly over a lot of people's heads, then at least they can have somewhat of instilled confidence by all these other validations that are taking place just because of who you're working with. And of course, I agree. I think Chainlink's one of those major partners that does that for a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I see like the whole market defining how these things are going to work is the most important thing, because what we see often in like the traditional identity space is government tries to bring in standards and enforce them and bring protections in place, but what you find is it's the private companies that have built far superior systems. Things like companies like Google and Facebook, you can love and hate them for what they do, but in terms of like how they identify people now and how they detect risk and how they enforce that, nobody can keep up because it's in their best interest to keep their users, you know, not have their accounts compromised because that loses trust in their system. So, you know, their controls and everything that they built is far superior to what a government can build.
And
or a
regulation will
regulatory.
never be able to keep up with the free market when it's allowed to do what it does best.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what's going to happen with Web3 is we're going to be here building tools and make them available, and that's going to be the we will set the standard effectively.
Tim, I want to bring it back to something that you said earlier in regards to like rotating your identity. You know, it's easier in Web3. You send your assets to another wallet, you know, you create another wallet and it's easy, but it would be nice, you know, people don't do it as often as they should. And it would be nice to have it done for you. Is that something that Signata does when you're talking about creating these different identities? Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like that's from a fundamental level, we want to make sure that users know from the get-go that, you know, the first identity you create, you're not keeping that forever. So you'll create that, you'll use it, and then roll it over, you know, sort of like one-click rollover with no effort. So it's very easy to do with on-chain because you can just move assets around as long as they are transferable assets. It gets a bit tricky with KYC because you don't want someone sending their KYC proof to somebody else that can then assert that they're you. But you know, we'll have systems in place to handle those migration steps.
You can coin that as a burner identity.
Yeah. That's you know, we call them like unlinked identities because they're not, you know, you use them for one specific thing, but you're not going to keep them forever. But you know, you will. You still need to use them effectively. You still need to assert that you own it. It's just you don't want to keep it forever, and you don't want to have you know, all the controls that your normal identities would have. But yeah, there's absolutely places that would be essential for using.
So is it a wallet then? I mean, how? Maybe I'm missing something, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
In the underlying tech, it's basically just a wallet, and that's all an identity really is, like a Web3 identity. It's just another wallet. But you know, we have the power with Web3 to just make as many as we need for what users need to do. And so, you know, we can separate the kind of wallet that you do your transacting with, interaction with DeFi and services like that, with your identity wallet. And you can just cryptographically prove that you hold both of those keys for anyone that needs to check if it's actually you. So, you know, at a core level, a Signata identity is just a wallet. It's just with the management and handling of it is handled a bit differently to what you would normally do with something like MetaMask, because MetaMask is just like you create a wallet and then you have an address and you're just transacting with that. But for Signata, you're creating 3 wallets at once, and then if you're rolling over, you're creating another 3 wallets, and things are moving around. It's just users aren't going to actually see that because that's way too much. That's an information overload for anyone for a normal person to see.
Man, if you can master making that simple and easy to manage, because I know, like for instance, I've got several different wallets, but I think I like my Coinbase wallet that I use, and how I, in essence, can go to settings, and they've got like 8 different wallets back there that I can switch between. And the problem is like even in that app, there's not a way for me to give it like a nickname so I can know which one's which. I still have this cryptographic key that if I want to move stuff around, and because I have several different wallets for different companies or different purposes, you know, it makes it very hard to manage. And if there was a way, one, to organize that, and you had a means to do that, and then make it easy to burn one and move it to another with it keeping all my, let's say, labels, if you will, that are only seen by me, man, that'd be a home run in so many ways. And I think that would make this concept of managing multiple identities easier for people to get their head around. Because I think on the default, it's going to seem like it's too much for people. They're going to say, "Oh, that's just too much. I can't mess with it." But it's early enough that until they understand the real reason they'd want to do that and the benefits for it, the key is going to be around most of like what we see in crypto is we got to make it so easy to digest and so easy to use. They don't even recognize how much tech is taking place behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a term from Microsoft that they used to use a lot. I don't know if they still do, but you make the customer fall into the pit of success. So it doesn't matter what they do. If they don't understand what they're doing and they do something wrong, it still ends up being a good thing. So a lot of it, we're going to have to abstract away how the identities actually work for users, because in the end, all we want them to see is like, here's an identity, and then just some click buttons to say like migrate or roll over or lock it, unlock it, that kind of thing. That's all a user should really need to see, because the underlying pieces behind it, it's far too complicated. I mean, even trying to explain a seed phrase to someone is very complicated if they haven't been in crypto for a while. And then even some people who've been in for a while still don't understand it because it is cryptography and it's boring and no one wants to learn it. But yeah, so that's our ultimate goal, is just making sure these systems are just sort of like one click for end users to interact with.
Now, we were talking, not yesterday, I'm sorry, 2 days ago, and I was speaking about interacting in DeFi on like a mobile device, like how we're very digital. Like, how often are people moving around and going about their usual day on their computers or with their computers? I would think that a lot of active DeFi users or just users in the space, a lot of crypto in general is going to be mobile. The Signata wallet, like I say wallet for, we said essentially it's like a wallet that's mobile friendly, right? And then you kind of brought up hardware keys. Is that integrated in the wallet, or can you speak on that at all? Did I ask that clearly?
Yeah. So one thing we want to incorporate, or we're building to incorporate, is YubiKey integration. And those, they're basically like a little multi-factor auth device. They're inexpensive and very easy to use, but they're basically designed as like a little Swiss Army knife of security. When it comes to other wallets, generally, like they are things like ledgers and stuff, they're all kind of built for mostly one purpose, and that is just key storage for an address, and then you're just using that for to make sure that no one can take your funds. But when it comes to YubiKey integration, when we've got that fully incorporated into the identity wallet management, those devices work perfectly fine on mobile, and basically every single platform. They're integrated into everything, and that's why we like them so much. Is because there's no custom building that has to happen for including them. It's just they can plug into phones, they can connect via NFC, that kind of thing. So we've got a lot of tools there. When it comes to mobile, things can get a little bit tricky because of all the different platforms on mobile, the different rules that are exposed. So, we'll probably have, a multitude of ways to connect identities through when you're using them in the mobile sense. But thankfully, the tech is actually getting a lot better. It was a lot worse like last year in terms of like trying to integrate into mobile browsers and all of that kind of stuff. But it is improving a lot. So the pathways are opening up for what we can bring in there.
Would a user be able to save, like other passwords? I had really only heard of a YubiKey from Leonid. He's our CTO, or the CTO at Bancor, and he had mentioned them a couple of times in terms of security and how important it is, and how easy, like simple they are to use. But I don't hear them being spoken about very often at all. It is more the ledger and the Trezor, but they do have a separate purpose, and you can store other passwords and things like that on there as well, correct?
Yeah, and that's what I mean by it being like a kind of like a Swiss Army knife of a device. It's not just key protection like that. It's MFA for services for non-crypto services as well. It can be for that. But you know, in the end, it's just encrypting and decrypting stuff. So you can encrypt and decrypt anything with it. It doesn't have to just be identities. It can be any sort of data. So that's fundamentally what we're trying to achieve is sort of give that that capability to users, because it's very much untapped. Even for YubiKeys, it's very much untapped. Most of the people using them are businesses, government, that kind of thing, because they just use it for that second factor authentication. But there's so much more that can be done with them that we want to tap into.
Thanks so much for kind of elaborating on that a little bit. I want to open to any of our listeners if they have any questions, just not only about identity protection, but just about safety and security and DeFi in general. And while I do that, Tim, you had said something earlier that got my attention in regards to you were speaking about something. You said, well, that's centralized. How do you feel about centralized versus decentralized, and where does Signata stand in that?
Oh, I mean, we're here to support both, really. We can't predict or know when which direction the environment or the crypto world's going to take. So might as well support both. And what's probably going to happen is there's going to be more centralization for some countries and not for others, and that's why we want to have that spread of tools available, so both can be satisfied.
And like the wallet that you're offering, though, that would be considered like a decentralized, like you control your own wallet essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And because fundamentally, like a service, no matter what it is, if it's a central exchange or something like that, they're not going to care really where the wallet came from. They're just going to care that it has met criteria, that it has met, KYC, AML, or whatever. So if you're still in self-custody of your wallet, but you're bearing a proof that you've undergone checks with something else, and you present that proof, then that should be enough for the service. They can say, okay, they presented that proof, we will accept it. And, if something goes wrong, we have something to fall back to. But they still don't actually really need to know the actual, control everything, because there's no point really. If they have enough proof of, enough proofs presented by the user to meet their requirements.
And that's kind of where the NFT would come in. So if I want to go in like as a user, then I guess I'm curious, what is the actual process for me if I want to create a wallet or get involved with Signata? Like, I know you have a token, it's whitelisted on Bancor. We actually spoke of a giveaway of it, but where does the token come into play?
Yeah, it's all around exchanging for rights, effectively. So it's things like if you're, so the Signata right contract is available. It's on mainnet. Anyone can use it, and that's the idea. Is anyone can go and define sort of a right schema and then issue out NFTs for that to other addresses. That's a no-brainer. But what ultimately has to happen is a service has to come along and integrate that somehow. And that's what we want to support, is third-party services coming in and integrating, having users connect, having them pay for a right using the token itself. So, for example, paying like, I don't know, 20 SATA for some sort of right to access a system. And in that process, that service will collect that and then issue out the NFT that says, this person did this or has access to this system. And then that sort of feeds a kind of like a loop of utility. So it's there's a lot of layers there that because it can totally change depending on what service you're dealing with. But fundamentally, that's what the token there is to serve, the purchase and exchange of rights between each other. There also there is some around the risk Oracle reporting components. There's been some design around staking as a service provider, staking the token itself as a sort of as a validation kind of layer. So a bit like other staking for proof of stake networks, where you're rewarded based on the quality of the performing properly inside the network and punished for not following the rules. So there are things down the track that we would like the community to build upon for that. But at a fundamental level, it's just if you're purchasing rights to access systems, then this is the token that powers that ecosystem.
I understand. Rick sent me a message, so I have to apologize for him. He was having technical difficulties. So maybe we could bring it back a little bit then. If I wanted to create a wallet with Signata, right? How would I go about doing that? Do I need to?
No. So that's not going to be a gate for people to get through, because anyone can create any Web3 wallet. Anyone can create any address. We're not going to stop people doing that. So you can create as many as you need. It's just a matter of once you want that address to actually do stuff. If you're just logging into a simple service, there's no cost. But it's around, like, if you're trying to access a premium service, then someone's going to be issuing a right to prove that you're allowed to access that, and that's where that exchange part comes in.
Okay, I understand. So something like the NFT, like essentially you're minting your rights on chain and you're holding this NFT.
Yeah. And if you want a right minted from some sort of trusted authority, then you're going to have to purchase that off them, because they need to cover their operating costs of doing. If it's like if there's a bridge set up between a current KYC service and then that gets converted into an NFT, that KYC service still charges for doing that. So, an exchange has to happen there to enable that.
I understand perfectly. You're essentially paying for the services that you're being provided.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, so again, I want to invite anybody up to ask any questions at all, just DeFi safety related. In the meantime, I'm hoping maybe you and Rick could maybe just give our listeners, if we have any new listeners in here, or really just users of DeFi in general, what are some just simple tips that you would give them in order to help them kind of secure their safety or their privacy in DeFi, working in Web3?
Yeah, I apologize for following off there. I need to go send Elon my request to fix Twitter Spaces sometimes the way to drop people.
Be sure to add the memo for the edit button. I don't think he's going to ever hear the end of that.
Yeah, I hear you. So I think it's always just a matter of understanding that when in this space, there's so much opportunity, and I think that's what draws people in, especially financial opportunity. There has to be this understanding that with that comes personal responsibility, because it's not Web 2. It's not as mature. There aren't as many protections in place, and you just can't run around ignorantly, blindly connecting wallets and doing things and not knowing what you're doing. And you should always, I would say, got to be learning, right? But I would say you also need to bring somebody alongside you that you trust, that can help show you what they know at least. And it's always a matter of then willing to share that to the next person. And then you move at the scale in which you're able to learn. Because if you're not doing that, then just like anything in life, you're putting yourself more at risk than the next guy. And more than that, you're not going to grow and then be able to benefit off all the opportunities that are there, regardless of what your motivation is.
That's
and that comes from
a point, Rick. Yeah. I would never ever cut you off, but I'm going to only because I wanted to put emphasis on what you just said. And I'm not sure I've ever really heard it, never mind heard it often enough. You said you should really only work at the speed that you're learning. Tell me how you, is that? I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
quote it exactly, but along those lines, like that is such a huge thing to just take from this, you know?
Yeah. Unlike, learning how to swim, you don't go jump off into the deep end if you haven't quite got comfortable on the shallow side yet. And even then it's kind of you're slowly wading your way over there. And at one point you got floaties and the other point you got, mom and dad holding you up and wherever the case be, till at some point you're jumping off the high dive and everybody's in awe of what all you're doing. It's no different than when you're entering any kind of new technology. It's just so important that you come in with a learner spirit, because if you don't, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to get burned, and then you're going to become a naysayer of the technology as a whole because you came in and fell on your face because you weren't willing to do the diligence and own the responsibility. And I just think culturally, we've somehow shifted to the place where everybody wants to delegate personal responsibility to be on somebody else or be on something else, some other entity. And there's plenty of entities and there's plenty of other people that are happy to take on your responsibility for you, either at a premium or at a cost to you that you may not like. And so I think it's just that overall concept that you really got to come into crypto with your big boy pants on, knowing that you're going to have to learn, you're going to be responsible. And if you take risks, sometimes that risk equates to loss. And you want to mitigate that risk as best as possible by only putting at risk, whether that be financials or personal information or whatever, at a degree that if you fail, you're willing to say, okay, that's okay. That was the cost of learning, and I'm okay with that because now I'm wiser and I can move forward, and it'll benefit me in the future, and it'll have an ROI. Right? Same way kind of business works.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tim. What advice would you give?
Well, the thing I see often is people are very blasé about wallet seeds and keys. It's definitely because of not understanding their impact, but we do need to educate people as to their importance, and it can be as simple as like analogies of you wouldn't give some stranger your logon details for your bank or a copy of your driver's license. But if you're passing a seed around, then you absolutely are effectively doing the exact same thing. So, we do need the tools there to discourage that kind of thing happening, but also build that. People need to understand coming into Web3. It's like if you are your own bank, then you're also in charge of the bank vault, and you need to make sure you're not giving access to that to people that you shouldn't be.
Just leaving the vault door wide open. It's like the perfect
exactly.
analogy. You hear you're your own bank all the time, but you never take it as far as like the vault analogy. Like, I appreciate that. And unless you guys have anything to add, I really just want to thank you for being here. Tim, you definitely kind of piqued my interest. And I have to say, when you were saying earlier that it's just another wallet, like it really doesn't sound like it's just another wallet. It really would be nice if all of the other wallets had these options that you're offering as far as security, because I think it is a really, really overlooked aspect in this space. We talk about it all the time, but then you hear these horror stories all the time. And like, I'm appreciative of Signata and what you are offering to like users in the space, what you're creating, what void you're filling.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful part, because at the end of the day, if that becomes his real marketing stick, right, once the product gets out and it's fully mature, then it is just another wallet as far as the user is concerned, right? As far as usability, ease of use, understanding it, navigating it. But on the back end, right, it's not your everyday wallet, and that's where ultimately the market goes. And sounds like he's head of the curve on it and setting the trend.
Thank you guys so much for being here. And Rick, I definitely would agree with that. Tim, thank you so much. Rick, thank you guys so much. And to the listeners, definitely appreciate all of you for coming out and listening to our Twitter spaces today. If Somebody, Tim, what would be like? I know Bancor, the best way to get us would be any of our DMs or, our Telegram. We're super active. Somebody wants to learn more about Signata or they have specific questions. Is it your Discord that you guys are most active? Is it your Telegram you're most active? What would be the best way for them to kind of seek out some more information on their own?
Yeah, so there's a whole stack of info on Telegram through our announcements channel. Discord is we have one, but it's focused mostly around development, like the software development part of it. So if anyone's wanting to build on the protocol or anything like that, then they can come join in there and ask questions, tech questions. We've got a public docs website, so people can read up on exactly how to implement things, how to integrate things. And yeah, I mean, we're currently in the process of transitioning to a full DAO as well, decentralized sort of organization for it. So there's going to be a lot of open public discussion that'll be kicked off soon about the next steps for the project and how the community can get involved.
You know what? That was the second part of my question earlier. And I just realized when you said that we didn't really touch on it. If you can take just a few minutes and kind of elaborate on that a little bit, because as far as centralized and decentralized, I think a lot of new users will probably enter the space through a sort of centralized exchange. I'm not anti by any means, and I do agree with what you said earlier. But as far as Signata, like you're working towards becoming a DAO and becoming fully decentralized?
Yeah, that's right. And so what also happened just recently was the project was sort of split in two. There's a separate governance token that's used that's going to be used only for voting. So we're currently in a sort of transitionary process, but that's basically to preserve the SATA token itself as a pure utility token. We don't want that, when you're involved in governance tokens, they're more expensive to use for everyone, and so that goes against what the ecosystem needs around just a pure utility token, and so that's why there's two. So what that means is there's a bunch of uncirculating supply for SATA. That's all going to be held by the DAO itself as a treasury for the future. We're pushing all of the upcoming, changes to the project. That's all going to be public for the community to be involved in, and then the community to also direct the direction that it needs to go into. So, yeah, it's we're sort of in this weird state right now where we're sort of overhauling how the messaging and everything for the project happens. But in the end, it's going to be even better because it's all going to be publicly managed on GitHub and through Discord and things like that.
It's actually refreshing because I think as much as like the space evolves and it's constantly changing and security aspects, like different phishing scams and things like that, you have to constantly stay on top of that. But it's nice to not stay stagnant as far as like the health and direction of your actual project as well. So congratulations on what you called overhaul.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely been rocky for the community because it is pretty large. They are large changes, but it's essential for if we're going to be an open protocol that people build on and we define standards that people need to follow, then it has to be community controlled. It has to be controlled by the people that are using it.
That's awesome. I respect that. I admire that. Thank you again so much for being here, Rick. Thank you so much for being here. And to everybody who joined us, I have to say thank you. And I always appreciate the support. And hopefully we'll have you back. Now, you said that the UB keys are being integrated currently into the wallet, correct? I know I keep saying
there's a stack of stuff that has to be put in place first, and including this whole decentralization move before other pieces get released. But it's going to be very iterative. It's going to be core functions around identity management first, and then just adding enhancements on top over and over,
That's
including
awesome.
the YubiKey stuff.
I look forward to it. It's like the perfect solution for those that are new. And I mean, those that are just, I'll say it, I mean, too lazy to do it themselves. They either don't know, or they don't really feel the importance, or don't, you know, make it a point to really do the things that you're looking to offer, you know, and I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to it myself. So I will definitely keep myself updated on it. And, with that, thank you guys again. I know it's the third time I've said it and I keep thinking of other questions, but Tim, I'll probably reach out to you for, you know, with some more questions as I go.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome. Cool.
Good
Thank
meeting
you
you, Tim.
guys. Rick, thank you. Tim, thank you. And we will catch you guys on the next Blockchain Banter. I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.